The fundamentals of raiding and dungeoning in World of Warcraft are pretty simple. Find instance, navigate the instance, find the boss, consume the boss, repeat until swelling's gone.
Whoa, what?
But while those are the basic ideas behind instance design and progression, people tend to overlook one element that's static across all instances. I said all instances. Oh god damn it. I am of course talking about trash mobs, the most vile, disgusting bloat to ever oversaturate the MMO genre, and WoW is no exception. I mean, the name trash is itself derogatory, so it's no wonder people tend to not talk about it all that much. And heck, a lot of the time trash is downright unmemorable, or even just awful. But while I do believe trash can be bad, I'm also of the belief that it can be pretty darn good, often offering small bits of insight into upcoming boss fights, or if it's really good, being challenging and extremely memorable to boot. Of course, Blizzard hasn't always made memorable trash. In fact, I'd argue Vanilla WoW had a very mixed bag of trash mobs, as Blizz was clearly trying to figure out where their footing lied. But over time, they really started to find their place in creating great trash that required strategy and thought to defeat, and oftentimes while teaching some new and varied mechanics. So what makes good or even great trash? If you want to know, I see no better place to look than my favorite raid, Ulduar, a raid that in my opinion has some of the best trash mob density and quality in raiding history. When I think about good trash, one thing's for certain: don't oversaturate the instance in it. Holy crap. Jokes aside, Ulduar doesn't overcomplicate itself with overwhelming amounts of trash that are there to bog down the pacing and create bloat. Oftentimes, packs contain 2 to 5 mobs and are sparse enough not to slow down progression. 2 giants in front of a doorway, or a couple of Stonekeeper style adds is more than enough to keep the player's attention without overwhelming them. But potato, how can less trash equal more, you may be asking? Well, I believe the expression is quality over quantity, and man does that saying have a lot of weight here. The trash mobs in Ulduar make up for their lack of numbers with unique and varied mechanics that force raiders to adapt as though they were pulling mini-bosses. Those giants I mentioned earlier, for instance, tether together and need to be tanked utilizing line of sight to avoid their earthquake attack, which has a minor knockdown and a massive 4-second silence. 4 seconds may not seem like much, but when your tank is eating hits to the face, it can be very detrimental. Standing behind the corners at the top of the stairs allows the party to safely LOS for healers and avoid their nasty silence. The Stonekeepers I mentioned earlier also have some pretty unique mechanics. Once pulled, the 2 adds will need to be separated a decent distance, as they will pass a light orb back and forth. Whenever one catches the light orb, it gets a nasty AoE and damage buff. But lucky you, the orb can be destroyed, and you split them far enough apart to where the orb has to travel some distance. Of course, in addition to the orb, you'll also want to kill these 2 adds at a very similar time frame, as the second living add will get a big enrage buff when the first one dies, and if you just happen to caught an orb at the same time, well, you're probably going to wipe if you can't DPS him fast enough. Or we can't forget these 2 bros who stack an armor or nature shred debuff, in which your tanks will have to swap them in order to avoid getting crushed. It's these little things that help to make Ulduar's trash a great example of how creative design and non-overbearing mob density can greatly increase player engagement and enjoyment. I'm not saying Ulduar's trash is why it's so critically acclaimed, but I bet it helped some. Of course, Ulduar isn't the only instance with great trash, and there are several examples that come to my memory of fantastic trash design, such as the 2 Draconids guarding Magma and Blackwing Descent, that constantly shift places with each other, meaning you'll need to tank them further apart, or Stonecore's Earthshaper adds, who cast a spell that transforms them into a powerful earth elemental that proceeds to AoE your dungeon group, meaning you're gonna have a bad time if you don't interrupt it. Oh, and let's not forget about the ever memorable snails from Throne of Thunder. You might argue they're more of a device than a trash mob, but they can be killed, and they serve their purpose well, killing many raiders who didn't pay attention to them. In addition to complex mechanics, sometimes trash is just there to teach players a lesson about an upcoming boss fight. Although generally pretty subtle, a lot of times trash right before a boss will have a mechanic that following boss will also utilize, such as Dark Keeper Adis from Antor's The Burning Throne, who does the big fire AoE attack that disorients just like Agrimar, or the named Naga around the ring prior to the Radiance of Ashara encounter in Eternal Palace, who all utilize some of the boss's abilities, such as the giant water tornado ability. This added layer means that trash mobs, in addition to being something raiders have to pay attention to for complex mechanic reasons, also teach raiders how to process upcoming boss fights and prep them in advance. And while I think trash is at its best when it's completely unique, the idea of it being a teaching tool is always welcomed. Of course, I explained how impressive mechanics are important to making great trash, but sometimes trash just needs to hit hard and come in decent sized groups. This was very common in Vanilla as well as the Burning Crusade and Cataclysm expansions. These groups of adds often had minor tricks, but weren't overly complex, usually packing a healer and a hard melee type add. And the best and sometimes only way to handle these adds is with aggressive CC and focused firing. Jumping back to Ulduar, I can't tell you how many New Age WoW raiders I've seen do Ulduar on time walking and literally wipe repeatedly to the first pack of trash after XT, simply because the damage is overwhelming and the group fails to CC or focus fire the Iron Mender adds, often leading to all their progress on AoEing the adds down, I hate saying that, being for naught. CCing adds puts a lot of focus on thought before action, something that really adds to the more tactical side of World of Warcraft, a side that you see quite often in boss fights, but not always in other areas. Well, now that I've given you some great examples of good and even fantastic trash, what makes bad trash? Using the examples I gave earlier, namely trash density, complex mechanics, and high difficulty control, we can easily wade through some of WoW's worst trash, with the latter two options often being combined problems in newer instances. Density is important, as I've already stated, and even if you design your trash well, you can still put way too much of it in an instance, creating fatigue for groups that are just trying to progress. Raids like Molten Core and Firelands suffer to this degree pretty bad, which is a real shame because I like a lot of Firelands' unique trash ideas, such as the exploding scorpions and the shell-spinning turtles. But overbearing people with trash is oftentimes more a curse than a salvation. Oh, and don't get me started on the Drake spam before Altraxian. Yikes, Blizzard, what were you thinking? Also, if your excuse is you can skip some of the trash, I wouldn't argue that's good trash design if you're skipping a lot of it. There are some examples of instances oversaturating trash in certain sections, such as Ulduar's vehicle section or the Iron Hall section of Blackrock Depths, one of my personal favorite instance sections of all time. But these kinds of trash sections are made this way on purpose and have actual reasoning behind their oversaturation, as in both cases it's easy to mass clear the adds as they're weaker type enemies, so the pacing never slows down. In fact, both of these examples push you to move quickly through sections, as stalling can often lead to problems with being overwhelmed, especially in the Blackrock Depths area. An opposite side of this problem is too little or just no trash at all. Trash is an important part of an instance, as it adds much needed layers to keep players engaged and challenge their minds. If you deprive them of this kind of content, you're oftentimes ensuring your instance will fall apart. Trial of the Crusader is an obvious example of this. Lacking any kind of trash, TOC, an already very small raid, feels microscopic in the grand scheme of things, because it has no density in its content. Just kill boss and then move on to the next boss. It's a regular snore fest if you ask me. Some raids can get by with this, like Eye of Eternity, as it only has one boss, though in all fairness, Malygos kind of mixes his trash in with his fight. And likewise, a lot of single or double boss raids still have some trash, such as Gruul's Lair or Obsidian Sanctum, so even that isn't a great excuse not to have trash. Heck, even Onyxia had trash, as unmemorable as it was. When talking about mechanics and crowd control, a lot of times poorly made trash will just be thrown together with little thought, often being super undertuned with no mechanics or little mechanics, allowing players to just pull a large amount of them and AoE them down. As I mentioned a moment ago, this is a big issue in newer expansion packs, with raids like Antorus and Nighthold barely having memorable trash at all. I mean, Antorus' elevator is more memorable than the trash you fight right in front of it, and that's just sad. Oftentimes Blizzard merely places this type of trash in areas to overbloat the content as to make it appear as though a lot of thought was placed into the design, when in reality it probably wasn't. This also usually means that trash isn't teaching us anything, which in my opinion is downright insulting to the player. I mean, Blizzard, you couldn't bother making it a challenge is bad enough, means most of it is borderline pointless filler, and that really sucks. Overall, I think trash is easily one of the most important elements of raid or dungeon design, and can be used to create great encounters that sculpt players into hardened adventurers, by teaching them unique challenging mechanics or prepping them for upcoming bosses, but can also be a huge problem if not managed properly or placed and designed without care. Trash can be such a good thing, but it can also be one of the most forgettable things you've ever experienced. Well, I hope you enjoyed me talking about the importance of trash mobs in World of Warcraft. Why don't you let me know in the comments some of your favorite and least favorite trash pulls? Love you some Stone Gargoyles and Naxxramas, but Encourage Trash Meteors one-shotting you just too much? I personally always loved the Ghost Dwarfs before the Archimedes encounter in Blackwing Descent. There's just something about enemies passing on their abilities to other enemies that really sounds cool to me. If you liked the video, why not subscribe and check out some of my other videos? I do a lot of WoW content on this channel. Well, I'm Captain Potato, and I'll see you next time, next video.